Good morning and welcome to the 7th annual Downtown Horizons event put on today by the Realtors Association of Sarasota and Manatee through the Commercial Real Estate Alliance. Thank you everyone for attending. We are really excited about our slate of panels and what we have to give you as information and hopefully inspire some good thought and possibly some good discussion as well. So welcome everyone. We're glad that you joined us today. With that said, I want to start out with some Commercial Real Estate Alliance business. As always, just want to highlight our mission statement and objectives and remind the group of why we gather and why we put on the events that we do. I'm not going to read through it, but these are our aspirational goals and what we look to support each and every time we get together. And again, we thank everyone for coming along with and supporting that mission. Next slide. Due to the realities of operating within the COVID environment, we will not be having a board installation this year. I did want to take just a moment to recognize our 2021 officers and directors. I can't speak highly enough of the group of people that you're looking at on the screen in terms of their willingness to put forward of their time and energy and effort to identify for us or to work for you guys towards those mission statements before. Our officers are as presented and are all at least second year participants on the board. I want to call out our directors otherwise and some really great supporters. We have Neil McCurry, Sarah Lynn Doral are also multi-year members of our officers and directors for CREA and great non-realtor members. I also want to highlight our two new members, Matt Fensky, who actually took over mid-year last year as we had a board member drop off, and Amy McDougall, who will be new for 2021. At your computer station, wherever you are, if you just put your hands together and appreciation for them coming on and taking on the responsibility of being part of the board. Thank you to all of you. This is your 2021 slate of officers and directors. Next slide. And here I'm going to turn it over to our chairman of our personnel committee and past president, Susan Goldstein.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. I don't want to overshadow. We are excited. You see that our commercial realtor of the year is Rico Boris. The commercial realtor of the year is for an individual who is both a strong commercial real estate professional and has contributed greatly to our organization. And that definitely is Rico. Rico was president in 2017, and in that year introduced the Sporting Clay program, which has been increasing in its popularity. And unfortunately, this was the first year we did not have it, but we plan to continue that amazing fundraising event. So Rico, thank you and congratulations. Back to you, Joe.
Now I'd like to highlight this year's President's Award, which is going to be going to William Wilson. And it's difficult for me to say how supportive William has been. And this is really awarded for his hard work and commitment to excellence throughout 2020 and for the many, many countless hours that you volunteered lifting others up. Your time so far on the board of directors has really been defined by the service that you've provided and generosity of spirit. And so with that, we're awarding William Wilson the 2020 President's Award. Thank you, William. Next slide. I'd also like to say thank you to all of our sponsors. They're all seen on the screen. Our gold sponsors, Berlin Patton Ebling, our Sable Palm Bank, Center State Bank, our silver sponsors, Shoemaker Loop and Kendrick, Iberia Bank, and Atlas Insurance, as well as our bronze sponsors, Achieva, Largo, Capital, Synovus Bank, Gulfside Bank, Lakewood Ranch Commercial, and the Florida Business Development Corporation. The funds and resources that they provide really go into allowing us to deliver the high quality products that we have, especially in the constricted environment we've been operating in 2020. And please do your best to support those that are supporting the mission of CREA as CREA members. Thank you to our annual sponsors. The last thing I'm going to touch on is our next event. I want to encourage everyone who's signed on today to join us again for Dr. Ted Jones, who will be speaking to us. He is the Stewart Title economist. I think this will be his 4th year in a row joining us in early part of the year to talk about the economy and where we're going. I'm sure he'll account for the fact that he totally missed the crashing of this economy due to COVID, but hopefully he'll be able to provide some great insights of how that and the elections will affect 2021. So please make sure and go ahead and get this on your calendars and set aside time to join us. Please note the time, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. We're going to be moving from the lunch hour to 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on January 19th. So mark that down on your calendars, and we look forward to seeing everybody in January. Next slide. And that concludes our kind of business items for CREA. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Susan Goldstein with one more thing to say, and that is that Susan has led the Downtown Horizons group. She put together a great slate to present to you today and has really done a lot of hard work. And here again, I'd encourage at your computers or wherever you are, a round of applause for Susan and her efforts in getting this gathered together. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Joe. The objective of today's Downtown Horizon is for you to gain a sense of what commercial real estate will look like when COVID-19 is in the rearview mirror. If we never hear the word COVID-19 again, we will all be incredibly happy. In fact, if this were a reality TV show, I might suggest you take a drink every time you hear the word. Well, go ahead, this is a virtual program. Well, we want to move beyond COVID in this program. We do not want COVID to be the focus. The reality is that this pandemic has shaped the new normal. What we as commercial real estate professionals need to come to grips with is, where do we go from here? How do we assist the businesses we serve to best utilize commercial real estate to fulfill their business objectives? This is the question for all of us: brokers, bankers, attorneys, appraisers, engineers, architects, and even public officials. We all need to answer the questions for ourselves. What does disruption mean to us? How will it change our commercial real estate landscape? What do we need to survive and thrive? And what did we learn to help us move forward? Well, let's get started. Before I introduce the panel, this program is being recorded. I wanted to let you know that you will have the opportunity to present questions. Please put your questions in the chat box. Ben Bacher will be monitoring the box and will miraculously pop in with a question following the speaker's answer, or hold your question till the end of the program. I want to thank the committee in alphabetical order: Ben Bacher of MS&C Commercial, Robert Fletcher of Bass & Associates, Tom Johnson, Lakewood Ranch Commercial, and William Wilson, Florida First Capital Finance Corporation. We could not have done this without Tiffany Long, the Commercial Real Estate Coordinator Extraordinaire. And of course, our panelists, who I am now going to introduce. They will be bringing their vast experience to our discussion. We start with Catherine Ferre, Community Engagement Coordinator for Realize Bradenton for almost 6 years. She has actively been involved in the not-for-profit community. Chris Gallagher of Hoyt Architects, an architect and planner, and formerly with the City of Sarasota Planning Commission. And Paul Caragiulo, co-proprietor of Caragiulo's and Owens Fish Camp Restaurants, formerly a Sarasota County Commissioner. What is the new normal? We need to start with a big picture from a planner's perspective. What developers and their teams are working on looks out 2 years and beyond. So Chris, what are you seeing in the development pipeline for your organization? And what was in the pipeline before the pandemic? And what changed with those assignments? And what projects have come in since the start of the pandemic?
Well, we're certainly still seeing a lot of residential still. Some of those projects took a little bit of a delay, if you will, when this whole started, and they wondered what was going to happen. But every single one of them is back on board here now locally. So that's everything from apartments to condos to affordable units. Again, just quite a few of those. Many of those are out-of-town developers. Got groups from New York, Connecticut, Midwest, and they clearly are bringing with them a message of, this is the place they want to do work. This is a place that they see as a place for the future for themselves. Some of the other project types that we're seeing, we've got a couple of office projects. We've got a couple of ALFs we're working on. There's a couple of entities that are doing parks planning right now. Got a group that wants to do a shopping center conversion, some townhouses, and then some projects that are new owners that want to sort of reimagine office buildings, bring them up to date, make them more attractive for the future. And in terms of we really have not had anything drop away. I think the one thing that we don't see in our list of projects that we typically do is we always have a few restaurants going on. We really don't see any of those right now. And I do have a friend that just opened a brand new place on Main Street, but he's got to be an anomaly. I can't imagine how many are actually doing that right now. There's a couple that are potential restaurants that are on hold, waiting to see how this is all going to pan out. But again, they're just those calls we're not getting right now.
Well, thank you. Okay, now let's talk about the restaurant industry. Clearly, the restaurant industry has been one of the most dramatically affected. Talk to us about the restaurant industry's experience, Paul.
Well, first of all, Susan, thanks for the invitation today. Really interesting panel. Yeah, everything has been turned on its head, which, frankly, there's really no way to overstate that. I don't know who out there, maybe there's one or two isolated places that really haven't been tremendously impacted. Right now, very much the same thing that Chris has described as what's going on within hospitality is looking forward several months or maybe the next half year or whatever it is to try to figure out what recovery looks like, and to also try to meet this. There's a huge delta out there that deals with, well, what is the regulatory environment going to look like as far as, how much of your business are you going to be able to use, aside from the perception issue of whether people are actually going to be going out to eat or not. In this particular community, certainly because we are still an older community, albeit we are getting certainly it's getting younger for sure. But when you're reliant on a vulnerable population being such a significant component of your business, things are just more profound, or the impact is definitely more profound. So everyone's just trying to figure out how to modulate their existing space and try to modulate the type of services they offer, trying to be creative about, opening times and when, trying to maximize the revenue potential for the amount of time spent with the door open. It's usually restaurateurs are decent improvisers. That's the nature of the business. So I think that's skill set, even though right now it's been tested pretty significantly. I do believe that there's a sense of optimism out there for no other reason than it's just probably more healthy. But there's going to be a lot of places that don't. That's a real shame.
Okay, Catherine, how have our downtowns been affected? How has downtown Bradenton been affected by COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Susan, for having me here. Definitely thank you to the committee, and a shout out to Ben Bacher, who's on our board of directors, actually doing his second tour on our board of directors, and we very much appreciate that. It's an honor to be here and talking with this great group of people. So how have our downtowns been affected? I mean, I would say in almost every way possible. But the good news is that, at least from where we're sitting in downtown Bradenton, we're all working together and pulling together to try to, like Paul said, improvise. You know, that's been really the word throughout the year that we've had to just keep going to, because whether it's pivoting our promotions or looking for ways to expand outdoor dining, you know, we've had to be very agile, but in a way still very steadfast to values and vision and the things that have always worked for us, like being intentional and strategic in what we do, trying to align resources and partners, and really listening, you know, through everything. So Realize Bradenton is a nonprofit, so we kind of work across different sectors. So we have, you know, that fortunate, I think, perspective to be able to bring people together around a common agenda, which is how do we continue to see downtown Bradenton thrive. So you know, I can talk more specifics if you'd like me to, but that's kind of the big picture.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the planning process you were in before COVID hit, and what really has changed since COVID?
Sure. So the last plan market analysis that was done in the city of Bradenton was Downtown by Design, and the city commissioned that in 2007. I lived in the city in 2007, and I remember very well kind of what the economy did after that. So, you know, it's a challenge, I think, to implement facets of that plan, or to you know, keep that market analysis projections relevant for long. So we were fortunate to get support from the Manatee Community Foundation to revisit that market analysis. We worked with Kennedy Smith of the Clue Group. She's a kind of national thought leader in areas of Main Street revitalization. So we started working with her in September of 2019. Of course, unbeknownst what was about to unfold 6 months later. And we've been fortunate to continue working with her. And she's been a great guide, both producing a market analysis preliminary report with sort of the conditions on the ground as they were before the pandemic, and then tracking along with national trends, looking at data and seeing how things are unfolding in Bradenton. So we anticipate a final report in the coming months.
Okay. And any sense of what the big changes in that final report are? Any broad strokes of what we'll see that's different?
I mean, certainly, again, so much is different. One of the really strong areas that downtown Bradenton, I think, has is that of the, you know, the restaurants, all the restaurants and food places downtown, only one is a franchise. We have a lot of really great independently owned, chef-owned food destinations downtown. And we have a great potential for retail. And I know a lot of people would say, oh, you know, Amazon, online sales, but there's actually real potential there. And she kind of helped us put some numbers to that.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. All right, Chris, let's move back to you. And in terms of the office segment, what does your experience with the Ringling Plaza East project tell you about the future of the office market and what commercial real estate will look like?
So we're doing 2 office buildings right now. One is the one you mentioned, which is be a new building right next to Ringling Square on Orange Ave. That's a 10-story building that is obviously not necessarily, it may or may not bring new new tenants to downtown. About half of that space will be taken by Williams Park, will be moving across the street. The other office building we're doing is for the city of Sarasota. They'll be building a new building on 2nd Street for their planning and development services. So both of those projects we've been working on through much of this year. So they, I can tell you during the programming conversations about those, there has not been a lot of discussion on people are going home to work. They're going to be working from their homes. I think in both those cases, in both the way those entities work, home is really not a great option. They may in fact have some people that do that, but by and large, that's not the case. You also you do not see them reducing the size of spaces. Certainly again, people are not trying to get closer together and squeeze people in, so that you don't see that happening either. I will tell you the other thing I will say about office is we've got at least one of our apartment projects is they're seeing home offices as the new amenity, instead of eating up a couple of thousand feet with a fitness center, thinking about, do we provide, and maybe getting rid of some of their storage, but do we provide very small offices so people's apartments aren't overcome with their home, their office life in their home. And last, I think Susan, I mentioned to you earlier, anecdotally, I've got a daughter and her significant other that just moved here from San Francisco. Their company went remote in the summer, and they have been that way since. They've given up. This is a company with 70 employees. They gave up their office in the center of San Francisco. Everybody is now remote. And my daughter is now buying a house, and the big thing for them was bedrooms for offices. So they went out and they looked at condos, looked at all kinds of different things, but they've ended up on a place where they'll have a place they can each have an office. And if you can imagine two people having to be on Zoom meetings all day long and trying to keep some kind of a quiet presence without the other person walking behind you, that amenity is an important thing.
Right, so the merger of office and residential is clear. It's kind of that COVID castle. Okay, so let's talk about trends. We're trying to understand the trends. What changes were an acceleration of trends that were coming, and what are trends that are purely a result of the pandemic? And I'm going to address this to all three of you. I'll start with Catherine.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think that a trend that we are seeing downtown that will, in a good way, accelerate going forward is the involvement of young people in really opening businesses, supporting businesses, being at the table where decisions are being made downtown and in the city. And Realize Bradenton has been fortunate to work with young people over the years on that aspect, understanding, all this buzz about the millennials. And people can talk about what that means nationally, but what does it mean for our community? And so we've been fortunate to work with that. That's something that our consultant, spoke a lot about, that millennials will see themselves as, having a stake in the recovery and going forward. We had some wonderful businesses, for example, on 13th Street West. Maybe some of you have had a coffee at Oscura Cafe. It was unfortunately one of the ones that have closed because of the pandemic. In that case, it was something that they really relied on that downtown workforce. And so when things went remote, and then when they stayed remote, I think that was a real challenge for them to, as Paul said, maximize that revenue while the doors were open. So it's definitely something I've been mourning. It was a personal favorite place of mine. But that's a trend that I think we're really working hard to reverse. And it doesn't just happen because it happens. It's a specific intentional effort on the part of Realize Bradenton, together with partners like the City of Bradenton, the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. I think that, well, I could talk more about retail, but I'll wait and let the other panelists talk.
Okay. All right, Chris, let me go to you.
Okay, so a couple of things that we've seen, a couple of interesting ideas. People that are restaurateurs that are saying, well, I don't want to be closed down again. So they're combining, and we've seen this in the past, but again, we're seeing the idea emerge here more strongly of the market in conjunction with the restaurant. So if the restaurants get closed down, you're still in business. You can still stay afloat. The other thing is, if you go by Orange Ave any Wednesday through Sunday, I guess, and see Citrus Square, Rosemary and Thyme is there, and no one was planning this, obviously, when we built Citrus Square, but there's a very, very large outdoor space there, and the place is just packed. Every one of those nights it's packed because they have the space for it. It was, designed, it's not leftover space, not a parking lot. We were consciously thinking about it. So it's a real attractor for a restaurant to have, attractive outdoor space that's designed for them. They can safely be away from each other. And so again, we may see that may become a stronger than ever consideration of, as you're thinking out parking lots and outdoor spaces, that, that availability to do that thing as well. And as I said, the other one, again, these mini office spaces, I mentioned them as amenities in an apartment building instead of a gym, but I think we're also having conversations about just building niches, if you will, into an apartment, that extra 5 by 6 foot space that you can just tuck a desk around the corner and work from there as well. So all of those things we've heard more than once now from people as they're planning their projects.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, Chris. Unfortunately, Chris stole my item that was the most prevalent one, and that is absolutely outdoor space. And it was sort of happening before COVID a little bit. We've been having conversations, especially in the city of Sarasota, about utilizing sidewalk cafe space and trying to make the pedestrian environment more inviting. However, I agree with Chris 100%. Is what I believe on the development side was at times a little more of an afterthought regarding what you do with outdoor space. And it's kind of like, it's viewed as a bonus potentially. That's going to be very different going forward. I think that there's going to be an enormous amount of effort on things like trying to control whether it's hard in Florida because obviously, you got a heat and a humidity issue and an insect problem. And I think you're going to see resources really focus on trying to make these outdoor spaces 100%. You probably won't get to 100%, but over 75% usable all the time. And not necessarily look at these development projects by saying, hey, I have a 10,000 square foot area and I'm going to make the walls go all the way to the end. As an example, I think it's going to be a central part of any conceptual design when it comes to hospitality.
Let's keep going with this space and place conversation. Okay, so we're definitely thinking about space in a whole different way. What are you seeing in your world? I know clearly this, we talked about the outside dining, but what else are we seeing within communities? How has your industry or sector been looking at space differently? I guess, Catherine, do you want to expand any more on that?
I do. I appreciate the opportunity to say that. I do want to echo a little bit the outdoor dining thing. Prior to the pandemic, the city of Bradenton had undertaken a streetscape renovation. And if you have not gone downtown and walked on the Blue Wave, I definitely suggest you do so. And I want to point out the walking thing for two reasons. One is the obvious health benefit of just getting steps in. And, if you live downtown or visiting downtown, it's a very enjoyable way to do that. But also the social benefit, the community benefit. And I think that's something that maybe, commercial realtors don't think a lot about, but that's sort of that cheers atmosphere of when everyone knows your name and you see your neighbors and so forth. I think we at Realize Bradenton say that downtown is everyone's neighborhood. So I wanted to say that, and then I wanted to go from that to parks. I think someone mentioned parks already. The city of Bradenton is getting ready to expand the Riverwalk. It's actually going to just about double in length, and we've been involved in the master plan for that. So we're looking forward to, I think construction will be starting in the not too distant future. So, parks are so important because as people are kind of isolating at home, stuck at home, remote learning, remote work, et cetera, parks come into play much more importantly, I think.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Chris, I know you talked a little bit about space and place in your comments about what's changing, but what about parking? Parking is another element that is impacted by this experience.
Well, there's a few competing and contradicting elements there. I've not been in an Uber since all of this began, so I don't know. It's just an anecdote, but I don't know how everyone else has felt about Uber since all of this began. We certainly were heading in the direction of lots less parking because of that. We are not seeing our office clients with a desire to reduce the number of parking spaces. We are seeing in downtown Sarasota, the apartment projects, as we're beginning to test these big apartment projects downtown. I think those guys are getting some feedback as to what they really need for parking. So I think that number, I think they're recognizing even though they built more than the city required, but they're realizing that the number was too high and they could come down somewhat. I'd like to circle back again though on Catherine's comments here. It's one of the notes that I made to myself. The whole, and this will come back when we talk about government a little bit. The whole notion of streets and parks, as I said, we're working on, we've been working with the town of Longboat Key on their new town center. We're also working with Ave Maria down in Naples on a great big park for them. That the city of Sarasota is looking for a master plan for street trees. This quality of life outdoors becomes a really big deal. I also had the experience this last year. I took several trips up to Maine, and we were staying just outside the national park there. And that was something, despite all of this, we felt very comfortable and were able to do, be able to get outside, go hiking, go through the trails. And if people are traveling less abroad, those become even more important, that we can do it here locally in the United States, and again, locally in our own community. So I think the communities that are putting a focus on that ability to, in the hours when you're not consumed with work or other activities, that you can, get outdoors and really be in pleasant places, whether that's hiking, jogging, exercising, dining. It just becomes all the more important. And so I think the winners are going to be people that are putting that kind of focus on that stuff. And for us, it's the design profession, it's, we're thought of as doing buildings, but, the buildings shape the street. And for our firm personally, it's always the thing we're looking at is, what is the ultimate result of that street that you're shaping because of the building. So it will continue to grow in importance. There's been a lot of focus in downtown Sarasota on sidewalk widths. So, again, for people that are, really concerned about COVID, if they've got a 10-foot sidewalk versus a 3-foot, it's just going to up the comfort level for them. So, again, I think you're going to see, it'll certainly, we think about that stuff, but we'll be thinking about it differently going forward because of what's happened in the last year.
Okay, thank you. All right, Paul, just to continue this, you brought us outside with you at the start of the conversation. What about inside the restaurant in a sense of place? What kind of things do you see happening inside a restaurant that'll be different?
Well, I think going forward, and we had kind of went down this path when we had our conversation a couple of days ago. I think that when it comes to leases and relationships with landlords and stuff like that, I think you're going to want to see some elasticity in altering things within your space, whether it be because of health concerns. I think how we look going forward and how a place is ventilated, your mechanical systems and all that kind of thing is, it's going to be part of more of a piece of the conversation. Perhaps things that we took for granted about the logistic and the engineering side of space. That's going to change, and I think it's going to. Chris has made the point where you see migration from some concepts into, whether it's a little more of a market, whether it's something like a grab and go. I think you're going to see, people just wanting to be able to execute on alteration very quickly on how their interior space is speaking to their customers, both from a safety standpoint, from a public health standpoint, and your entire guest perception. It's going to be really important to show people that you're being responsible with your interior space.
Okay, thank you. All right, in terms of financial sustainability, how do we stay financially viable in the respective sectors and industry? Financial sustainability is the key to short-term and long-term success. How do we adjust the way we do business to stay financially viable in this uncertain time and going forward? I'll start with Paul.
I think the single biggest thing is how you stay open, in essence. I mean, that's what financial stability is going to be, is your relationship with your lenders and your relationship with your landlords are now going to have to be viewed as forms of partnership. And that's not, I don't think that that's the template for every tenant and landlord, relationship. It depends on whether you have property managers or whether you have, large companies, small companies, single owners. I think there's going to have to be, because that your fixed overhead portion of your expense side is really where you'd have to go to try to get some form of relief. Once you are open and closed a certain amount of hours and your payroll numbers can be managed, I mean, your occupancy costs, what it costs you to be in the space, and what it costs you to have insurance and everything else is going to require some type of alteration. And if you really look into what leases are going to look like going forward, I think they're all going to contain a whole new category of provisions that didn't exist before. You have condemnation clauses and you have act of God type stuff, but what do you call a situation like this one? This is from the pages that aren't in the book. So there's going to have to be provisions that deal with what if this type of thing. Because I mean, I think it's we're pretty certain that the likelihood of this happening again is certainly very high. How cyclic it is a whole different issue. But what do you do when government compels you to sort of close your business, or when there is a generalized that results in 20% of people going out to eat and drink than that there were previously at any given time? That's going to require a little foresight. It's going to require a lot of trust, and it's going to require.
Okay. All right. Let me, Catherine, is there anything you have to add to that?
Sure. Again, as I said earlier, we work across many different sectors, including, for example, the cultural sectors, like for all the cultural assets downtown. So when we think about financial sustainability, we kind of think more of a big picture, like how do we help ensure that downtown has a diverse enough profile of places to go, things to do, restaurants, eateries, etc. Earlier I mentioned the point about retail, and one of the findings of the preliminary report was that within a quarter-mile radius of the city center, which we're putting approximately around the city hall area of downtown Bradenton, there are 29 businesses. About 14% of the total are retail. So 14% of those businesses are retail, but most of those include restaurants. So without the restaurants, the downtown district really only has about 7% retail, and the norm for a healthy sort of mixed use downtown is about 15 to 17%. So, I mentioned it earlier that we have some opportunity to grow in that area. And if those of you who have been downtown, the city's parking garage has retail spaces right there on Old Main Street. And quite honestly, to have 5 contiguous available spaces in a city center is an opportunity that doesn't come along very often. So, we've been working with the chamber, whose offices are on the other side of that building, and the city of Bradenton, and lots of partners to kind of, see if we can find a way forward on those, because those 5 spaces pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, it'd be nice to fill them, but the urgency now of seeing businesses close really kind of brings a whole different level of calculation. So definitely that's something to watch, is that city center garage in downtown.
Okay. Chris, is there anything you'd want to add?
A couple of thoughts. One is, Paul mentioned relationships. That's certainly an opportunity we're seeing now. As I said, we're seeing new developers that we're just getting introduced to from coming from other states. And so our effort is always to build the relationship first, and so hopefully it's not just one project, but it's many. The other thing I'd say is we're working on another project in downtown Bradenton on Old Main, and it's like we've got about 20 units in that building, and there's no on-site parking whatsoever. Which brings me back to again this idea, if you're in an apartment building and you do happen to have a car, and the car is now going to be in a public parking garage, and the public parking garage is a few blocks away, it comes back to, again, what is the quality of that experience? Do I feel safe? Do I feel comfortable? Is it a good experience or a bad experience as I drop off my car and walk to my apartment? And again, I think we'll see more of that kind of stuff. So it's again, central theme there again. Just before this program began this afternoon, I've got a friend that's a realtor up in New York, and I get her monthly, she works for a big brokerage firm up there, and I got their monthly thing. And there's a couple of ideas that were in that report that I thought were interesting and may potentially apply here. They obviously had a huge drop in apartment rental costs. They've just had, they lost a lot of people. But apparently the month of November was a huge month for them. Signing up, it was at lesser rates, but people coming in from the suburbs who didn't have the opportunity to be in the center of the city, now coming in. And a similar thing with retail, where people moving out of some of those big spaces, and they're predicting that they will actually, again, this is a pretty optimistic point of view, but they will actually have they will have a greater variety of retail, because again, not so great for the landlord, but better for the tenants. And so the smaller tenants, as opposed to the nationals, running in and doing a lot of different things that you haven't seen. Some of those streets can get pretty tired with banks and electronic shops and things, but again, expecting a great deal of variety going forward. Again, don't know how much that kind of thing will affect us here. Don't know how much those prices will fluctuate, but interesting concept coming out of the biggest city in the country.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, we have a question, and I want to get back to Paul, but what type of technological innovations are you seeing for office buildings? temperature control, that kind of thing, keyless touch.
Yeah, there's a few things. Obviously, everybody's really concerned about the quality of the air. So I think you're going to see as a trend, you're going to see that will actually become a marketing advantage if you've got a filtration system in your AC system that's superior to others. The other thing we're seeing, we're getting calls, and we had a demonstration here a week or two ago from a group that does restroom faucets and things, setting up restrooms so you don't have to use your hands to touch anything, that you can go in and put your hands under the soap, under the dryer, under the faucet. You can open the door without having to put your hands on the door. Again, what we continue to go through is probably not the last time we're going to go through this. So I think you're going to see a lot of creativity in terms of that kind of thing as well. In terms of access, again, that stuff just continues to get more sophisticated. And whether it's, doorways, elevators, all of those things are just, again, there's almost nothing you can't do now in terms of providing access at certain times of the day for the people that you want versus the ones you don't want. That will have impacts on front desk people, and whether it's office buildings or apartment buildings, the need for those or not, based on, again, more sophisticated access systems.
Okay, thank you. All right, Paul, you had some additional comments?
Yeah, there was one more thing I forgot to mention. The other thing, looking forward as to what this new normal is going to look like. The other component to this that's an external one, but will certainly be relevant, is when prospectuses and business plans put together, at least on the hospitality side, they're going to look very different from the personnel model, because they're now going to have to account for higher payroll costs going forward. So that's going to inevitably change the syntax with how you run service in particular. I mean, that's really what it's going to affect. It's not going to really affect anything other than that. And I'm sure that there are similar components that are going to change on the retail side, should retail still exist. I mean, that definition was already in flux. So, but that the payroll issue and the increased minimum wage is not a small thing.
Okay, thank you. Let's drill down. We started talking about leases. I think, Paul, you mentioned that. And certainly there are going to be changes, and we will hear, and William Wilson is there putting programs together for next year. I think there's a great need to start talking about what those clauses are going to look like, and what we may want to hear from. So just what are you seeing as kind of users of these leases? And I guess particularly you, Paul, specific clauses that you'd like to see in specific situations. And I know in the chat we have a question about, looking at percentage rent being more popular. I mean, that can be addressed by us and maybe by you as a user, as a representative of the restaurant community. Paul.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's going to affect it in a couple of ways. I mean, it's going to, we'll just take the outdoor thing to begin with. I mean, lots of leases don't include outdoor space within their GLA. And again, these are all things that are kind of viewed as bonuses. So what is that going to look like going forward? How are you going to account for exigencies that come into play, meaning anything that results in you losing utility of your space? And what does that look like? Because that's going to be a nuanced thing potentially. It's not something that's going to be as binary so that you can put, specific types of clauses in there. It's going to, I'm sure we're going to see the word reasonable come up lots of places, as if there's any shortage of use now. And the other thing is, what about provisions in leases that require you to be open at a certain time, like minimum hours? There are lots of larger developers who, it's important that your business be open, even perhaps at a time when you don't necessarily want to be open or it doesn't really work for you. There's going to just be, I don't know how you could potentially codify some of these things, because it's really going to depend on the situation, and the situation could change. It's gonna, you know, as Chris said, also, it's going to place the burden back onto this human element, and it's come down to relationships. It's going to come down to trust. It's going to come down to, you know, you would like losses to be spread over an area, but you'd also like to be for everyone to share in the abundance, should it exist. And that's gonna, you know, those things can be difficult to codify, because they're a little bit perception driven, and it all depends on what your relationship is. Not everyone has a great relationship with their landlord, although I'll say we've been very, very fortunate in the time that we've been in business in this town, to always be working with folks who understand the nature of what we do. But you know, I hate to leave this to the lawyers to figure out, because it just never seems to work out. I think it's going to be something that the non-lawyers are going to have to figure out.
Okay. Chris or Catherine, do you have anything to add? As Chris?
The other thing that comes to mind as Paul is speaking there is I've not done a business plan for anything since this all began, but I can imagine the whole nature. There'll be a whole new section in business plans for the what ifs. So for the authors and the readers of those business plans, this is a new thing that everyone's going to have to deal with.
Okay, Catherine.
And I this is absolutely. I reached out to business owners in the downtown core in the spring. I think it was mainly in April, you know, just to kind of assess where are things, is there anything we can do to help, and so forth. And that's really what it came down to, is that working together worked. And those people that had, you know, for example, great relationships with a local bank, or that they, you know, had that great relationship with their landlord, you know, have definitely fared better and had less sort of heartbreak over these past few months. So I just, you know, it's not exactly our specialty, these specific on leases and so forth, but the little bit that I've waded into that area, and really to be intentional about it and reach out and let the people in our entrepreneurial ecosystem know, hey, you know, you're not alone. Let's figure this out together, and whatever we can, you know, resources we can bring to the table to help, we'll reach out and find them.
Right. Well, you've given me a nice segue to the next question, which is about relationships and trust. So in our discussions, relationships came up as a strong element. Let's talk about that. What relationships you see in your sector and can help us move forward, and how has that played a role? Let me start back with you, Catherine.
Sure. You know, I think one of the most encouraging relationships I saw kind of spring from that is how the young business owners that I mentioned earlier were really ready to improvise, pivot, adapt. And I think, you know, the missing piece that we're looking for right now with Realize Bradenton is sort of like, how can we take a more active role in that? Because I mean, the resources out there are just amazing. The Chambers of Commerce, the SBDC, Minnesota SCORE. I mean, there's just so many, I couldn't even name them all. But a lot of the business owners we were talking to downtown, you know, they didn't know how to necessarily connect with these places. They love mentorship, but they didn't necessarily know where to start with that. So this is an area we're just beginning to explore as our organization. But I think, you know, it's being intentional. Absolutely.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. So I don't think to overstate any of that. You know, that's exactly it. I was just respond. There was another question. I don't know if we were supposed to respond to the questions, but there was a question that came up from Matt that I was just responding to. Do you want me to respond to it now? It's kind of along the same line.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's what happens, you know, going forward as far as expansion. You know, we're still planning on expanding out to Lakewood Ranch. That's still on. And he asked a question about ghost kitchens and a delivery only model. I'm sure you'll see lots of that here and there. For us, truth be told, we're not really food people. We're space people who like food. I can't say that we would really have any particular interest in getting into that, because we really like doing space. And so right now we like thinking about outdoor space.
Okay. All right, Chris, do you have anything here?
Just on the relationship front, I mentioned a few of these things. For us, it's a pretty short list of relationships. It's, our developers, our sub-consultants, our engineers and things that team with us. Certainly our employees, and, all of us have had to be more flexible with, employees and the ability, dealing with schools being out and working from home and that kind of thing. And so that there, and then last, which I think you're going to get into a little bit, is just the whole relationship that, we've got to, every day we've got to deal with folks across the street at City Hall and county and things. So those relationships and, some mutual respect and understanding there is really important.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let me try and drill down a little bit more in the relationship sector. I guess Catherine talked about the interaction or interdependency of like the coffee shop on the office workers, and then and an element of support, but it's also the landlord-tenant relationship. And we've seen different tenant and landlords interact and deal with the whole either abatement of rent or working with tenants on rent. We need to start looking at that and understanding that. Where have we found the help? And I think one of the conversations that came up when we were all talking was the difference in somewhat of the national versus the local, the national brands versus the mom and pops, and how they have fared and dealt with relationships with their landlords and with their customers. Anybody want to address this? Paul, I think it probably affects your sector the most.
Yeah, I have a little more experience that dealing with when we were trying to help folks through the CARES Act process with the Chamber of Commerce and Sarasota County. And it really comes down to, again, back to the center point, to the main point. Who are you communicating with when you have an issue about occupancy? Are they property managers? Are they the actual landlord? It really depends. I would imagine in a very large organization, there are specific folks who deal with that, the real estate management component, and those are probably very different conversations. But I do know that there were restaurants in particular that were running into problems just getting the right person on the phone who can actually make a decision that could provide some relief. I heard that constantly from people as they were trying to, conversationally, as they would tell me about their experience, what business was like. But it really all depends. It all depends on who the two people on either end of the phone are.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Let's just talk about some of the changes we've started to see. We think some are temporary. Maybe a little longer than what we normally consider temporary, and some are long-term. Are there any specific changes that you'd want to categorize in one way or another? Let me start with, I'll go to Chris.
One of the other things I guess I'd like to, bring to this conversation is I think certainly in the first time in my memory, when people are making a decision about where to live, there's always been are there state taxes or aren't there, or, things that are a little bit, you got to do some research into. But man, for every man, woman, or child, you almost can't help miss the fact that states are handling things differently. And so all of us have choices we can make about where we want to live. I think it was it was part of the founders' idea that the states would be different and they would handle things differently. But I don't think it's ever been so in our face as it has been the last several months. It'll be interesting to see whether that continues to be the case, or whether again, it reverts back to, it doesn't make much difference. You can live, work wherever. So that'll be interesting to watch. And also, as for the nationals who have to do business in different states, it'll be interesting to see what their take on, which states they want to be in, based upon the way they see those states handle situations like this.
Okay. All right, great. All right, let me go back to Paul.
I don't really have much to add for that as
Okay. Okay,
either.
Catherine. I'm sorry. No,
He said it all.
Okay. All right. All right, Catherine, anything to add?
Sure, absolutely. I wanted to just circle back on something that Chris said earlier that I just thought, I wanted to jump in and say hallelujah, but I didn't want to interrupt. And that was about the quality of life outdoors and, being outdoors in pleasant places. And I think we've seen some of that pre-pandemic with places, companies like Amazon looking at, the kind of city environment that they wanted to be in. The other thing we found even 5 years ago that has continued to be true for our experience and both the research bearing it out is that the millennials and the younger generations actually look for a place they want to live first, and then they figure out the job. And that's been kind of a reversal, I think, from previous generations, that it was always the job first, and then, I just live here because my job's here. So these are big generalizations, but you can kind of think about that in terms of market forces, consumer attitudes, and so forth. One thing that I wanted to just add to this is that when I first graduated from college, I went to New College here and just thought, wow, this Sarasota area is really nice. I'm going to stay around. And I got a job with the city. And at the time we were working on an initiative with walk to town neighborhoods. And I think that quality of life outdoors, yes, parks like Robinson Preserve or Emerson Point are important, but I think people really enjoy that urban, even though we're small cities, they do also enjoy that urban quality of place outdoors. And as you can see in the background that I've chosen here is somewhat new public art piece. I think that has a relatively high ROI. It's a little hard to sort of quantify, but it's something that people appreciate about where they live. It builds pride. It gets them connected to their city. The city of Bradenton actually in the past 10 years has gone from having 7 pieces of public art downtown to having 67. And that is something that even after the pandemic, we're going to continue on. We have grant money to add additional public art in the Riverwalk East. And we have some temporary public art projects planned. So, I think there were forces at work that we've always been excited about when it came to creating quality outdoor space, whether it's a farmer's market, a sidewalk, a park, an urban plaza. And the COVID pandemic has really put that in sharper relief for us. And so we're really, I think, even more deeply committed in finding new partners to work with who are excited about that. So I'll wrap it up there. I could say more, but I'll wrap it up there.
Okay, thanks. All right. How can we help you? That's what we really want to go to now. I mean, clearly we would all like to sell you something. Let's be very clear. And we'd like to know what that would look like. But also we're in an organization in the community that want to support the businesses, professionals, and government organizations. What do you need? Give us your wish list. Let me start with Paul.
Real estate agents as a whole are pretty decent, pretty good communicators. So I never really feel I know a good number of commercial real estate people. My brother is a commercial broker, and it's great that they're very willing to engage, and they're always seem to be interested in working on interesting projects. So, I mean, I guess I would say, hopefully, one will not make the assumption that, interest might be at a lower ebb because of the situation, interest could just as easily be at the apex level. So I would just ask for the engagement to continue as it is, not to disengage at all.
All right, thank you. All right, Catherine?
Well, so the question, just to make sure I understand it, is how can
the Realtor organization help you? I mean, I don't know that we have something to sell you per se, but so how can we help you and your organization?
Yeah, I think actually the main answer to that is just connect with us. If you have questions or don't know much about downtown Bradenton, connect with us or any of the wonderful partners that we work with. One of the stories that always breaks my heart is when I either am speaking to a group or speaking with the volunteers, of which we have almost 200. And they say like, gosh, I just love Bradenton and my realtor steered me away from here. And, that really breaks my heart. And we work in an arena called place branding. And some people may think it's just marketing an image of Bradenton that is aspirational, and to a certain degree it is aspirational. However, is really place branding is all about authenticity. And so if you tune into our social media channels, if you get on our website, walkbradenton.com, which has all of these location cards of all the things to do in downtown Bradenton, to become more informed and knowledgeable would be just a real gold star for us. We love realtors, our maps, our resources, our farmers market can be the realtor's best friend. And we just really welcome realtors who want to connect with us via, any kind of communication channel. So like I said, e-news, social media, our YouTube channel, just being knowledgeable about what's happening in downtown. And if you don't know, ask. We love talking with realtors.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chris.
I think for us, it's the matchmaking that goes on with commercial realtors. It's bringing in new developers, and it's also that that sort of looking at either a raw develop a piece of land or the tired old shopping center, office building, whatever, that needs to be reimagined, and that there's potentially a new market for. We've seen a lot of that in downtown Sarasota the last several years of just, all of a sudden there's, because of some little zoning code change, there's all this talk now about the Legacy Trail sort of taking off from coming up to Ringling and then heading down Ringling to the Bayfront. There's a whole number of hidden opportunities because who wouldn't want to be right on the the trail as it heads through downtown. So it's really sort of seeing those things before they happen and just getting with us and helping. We can bring that stuff to life, and then sometimes the developer isn't there yet, but the realtor sees an opportunity, comes in, we figure out what we could possibly do, and then the realtor can take it back to the development community and find the right match for that. So that's really the business we're in, and we work with a ton of commercial realtors doing that kind of stuff.
All right, well, thank you. All right, I've got one last question I want to wind up, and then I know Ben is biting the bit with some questions that have lined up. So let's talk about the vision of the future. So we've had Downtown Horizon for the last 7 years. What do you think we should be talking about or will be talking about in 5 years and in 10 years? Okay, Chris, you're on screen. Why don't you go?
So I think we're going to be talking about some of the themes that we've just talked about. Catherine is, her whole life is built around this. It's really quality of place. We will attract people here, and we will keep people here. I've mentioned my daughter already. It's inconceivable to me that from San Francisco, she's ended up back in Sarasota. I never thought it would happen. And when she returned to Sarasota, she saw a bunch of different things going on that were really exciting for her. She's 31 years old, and she's now thinking that, I didn't think it. This is sort of the place that I knew and didn't, had an experience. And now as a 31-year-old, there's just all kinds of stuff that she's really enjoying. And so it's, that is the thing, as I say, that'll attract and keep them here. And we, again, sort of the curse of all this for the North is that people are looking to Florida. They're looking at it as a place of opportunity, and when opportunity and attractiveness combine, you got something really special going on. So I think we got to continue to move in both those directions from a government point of view about opportunity and from a, just everything we do, all of us together to make the place just an attractive place to live.
Okay, great. All right. Paul?
Well, hopefully looking forward, we'll start to have some conversations, because I think there's still work to be done about how we look at use specifically, as opposed to, obviously we're in the midst of a very large experiment that is working out very, very well with mixed use, having residential and commercial within at least the downtown corridor. But I think we still haven't fully bought into it I don't think the regulatory environment's fully bought into it yet. There's still a distant relative of the old Euclidean sort of attitude running around, and I would like to see that person fully, cast from our little family, because I think in order to keep space occupied, we're going to have to eliminate some arbitrary types of barriers that really get into what type of business should be in a space. So I think that that kind of thing. I think hopefully we're having conversations where we're not getting overly fixated by whether people are allowed to have sales racks on the sidewalks, or whether I think we hopefully will migrate to a full urban mentality. I'd like to see that happen a little quicker.
Okay, thank you. All right, Catherine, bring us home, and then we're going to go to questions.
Sure. All right, thank you. When we did an initial webinar with our consultant, Kennedy Smith of the Clue Group, it was in May. The pandemic was still relatively kind of a new thing, and we were all trying to figure it out. And I ran across a quote at that time that's from Albert Einstein. It says, "Logic will get you from A to Z, imagination will get you everywhere." And, I think that in addition to numbers, in addition to analysis and logic, the stories that we think about ourselves can really influence what we think the future can hold, and then our actions as a result of that. So one thing that Kennedy said that kind of stuck with me is in response to a question of someone saying like, oh, well, how do we attract, national chains or big national retailers or national restaurants to our downtown? She said something to the effect of, you know what you do? You grow your own scene that is so vibrant and people love it so much, and the restaurants and the stores are just so hopping that those national retailers will be begging at your door and you'll be like, no, thank you. So, I'm embellishing it a little bit. She didn't quite say it like that, but I think you get the idea, and that these stories that we tell ourselves about what's possible, about what our community is all about, can have a great effect. And so that's, an area, like I said, tune in, realize Bradenton's always trying to share what's new, what's happening in downtown, and really spark that imagination. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's turn it over. Ben, what questions do we have?
Hey, everybody. First off, I just want to thank all three of our presenters for a terrific program, extremely informative, awesome. I've been logging some of the questions from our attendees, as well as just putting in a few of my own that I thought came up. But honestly, by this point in the conversation, about a third of them have been answered, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the sign of a good, healthy discussion. So if you don't mind, I've got a few questions still lingering out there, kind of spread across the scope of influence for all of our presenters that I'll pitch at this time. First one I'll take is directed to Chris. Chris, how have the prices of building materials affected the design of buildings and the willingness to make all these changes? And how do you think that will also, be shaped going forward?
The prices have held fairly steady through this year. We did have some very significant issues several months ago, and actually still lingering somewhat with wood, with manufactured wood products, trusses, et cetera. All of that COVID related. You know, they were shutting down mills up in Canada, and they were shutting down truss plants. That caused some real problems. It affected costs. It affected and ultimately it affected costs because the projects were delayed. So I think from the people we've been talking with, they're more receptive to other types of building materials because of that. But generally, it's been fairly. I just got a report this morning on 4 different projects we worked on the last couple of years here that are concrete block and plank projects, and the numbers have held pretty consistent with them. It's really not the materials that drive those things up. It's most recently stuff, again, with few exceptions in there, it's other things that have an impact on costs on them.
Terrific, thank you. Next one I will address first to Paul, and Chris, if you want to add on to it as well. Paul, in your restaurant spaces, being that you've got people coming in and out and dining regularly, how do we tell if an indoor space has the proper air handling system and proper HEPA filters, and what are you guys doing, and what are your colleagues in the hospitality industry also doing to address airflow in these types of buildings?
Oddly enough, I'm not familiar with what the specific requirements as far as the filtration, or what grade of filtration, but I do know after this really got kicked off, that's immediately where lots of focus went. And I know this because there were an enormous amount of reimbursements that were requested through the CARES Act that dealt specifically with the reimbursement for that exact thing. So it definitely was something that was coming up and was being dealt with. But I don't know. I would imagine there could be something down the road. The legislature could make a whole bunch of changes that have to do with COVID going forward. It could be a kind of thing where you not only would have to utilize certain types of technologies, but you probably would have to advertise it in some way, whether it's a sticker on your door or something like that. But I think that's one of the things. There's going to be a whole bunch of legislation that has to do with the operational components of how commercial spaces function in this next legislative session. Everything from liability for outbreaks and things like that to outdoor space, how they regulate outdoor space, how they count it from an administrative law standpoint. There's going to be no shortage of bills. I just heard about one the other day, in fact, about cocktails to go. That's coming up too. Nothing to do with your air filter, but on my mind nonetheless.
Yeah, I just tag on to that I think there's an opportunity here for the private sector, sort of like a consumer reports of restaurants. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have that kind of stuff that you can go, grab a website and see, what's the latest in this restaurant? Is there, they up to speed? And you could think of all the other things you could add for restaurants in terms of the whole quality of the experience. I think there's a great opportunity there.
Yeah, I wonder.
How about a filter cam? Can you do a filter cam?
I wonder if we'll start seeing apps like Yelp adding additional features into all the restaurant listings that have to do with safety and floor plan and outdoor dining in regards to this. Next question I will address to both Catherine and then also to Paul. During the last 9 months, there's been a lot of discussion about the impact to the mom and pop stores as opposed to the amount of money being spent with big box retailers and national retailers. How do you both see us slowly transitioning out of this pandemic phase as we start returning to normalcy in bringing in a large scale groundswell support local campaign? Catherine, both from your experiences through community building and Realize Bradenton, And Paul, maybe also with you and your hospitality-based groups, kind of like the Fresh Originals group and things of that nature. How do you foresee transitioning America to getting back to supporting local? Catherine, we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. You know, I promise I won't geek out too much on the academic research here, but we really have enjoyed digging into some reports from the Knight Foundation that talk about how people's attachment to where they live, you know, in other words, how much they love the city in which they live is actually an economic driver, that all other things being equal in the city and in the survey sample. The Knight Foundation, you know, found that this can make a difference between cities that are resilient and that bounce back from economic challenges and cities who don't. The other thing I'll just kind of tack on to that is that, again, data, I won't get into all the specifics, but we've got some really great data from various studies that show how much more resilient those local businesses are. So, you know, investments in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of a downtown just pay more dividends than just, you know, vacancies going down or, you know, revenue to the city tax rolls. Those are great. But, you know, for example, one study we looked at showed how after a hurricane, the larger national chains were slower to come back online, had a lower rate of sort of reopening and so forth 6 months after. And the locally owned places were coming right back online. So, you know, I think Bradenton is that's one of the things I love the most about this community is that we have such a supportive kind of shop local, buy local vibe here. You know, I think that's really an easy sell. That's actually a low-hanging fruit, if you will, as we start to transition from crisis mode to, you know, okay, what's next?
And Paul?
Let me think about. I'm just trying to think about this in a. I'm not sure. Can you repeat the first part of the question, honestly, Ben? Because I just had something else I was thinking about along the same lines. Well, you wanted to know about what specifically?
More specifically, how, you know, local restaurants and local businesses are going to drive home the point to shop local to help mom and pops get back on their feet quickly.
So, So one of the point that I had written down before was that what's interesting about hospitality is it's one of the few sectors left where the little folks can still sort of compete. Unlike, you know, lots of other things, whether they've been swallowed by Amazon or, you know, retail environments change or all that, but there's still, you can still do pretty well. You can thrive. I don't know how, if it's really going to be, I don't know that reminders to try to support the local businesses are going to be, I don't think they're as necessary perhaps, because I think people intuitively support who they want to support. In the very beginning of this, you saw people being very generous with servers, for example, and you whether you're on Facebook, whatever, you saw lots of people being very, very open and vocal and conspicuous about how, you know, that they were still wanting to support these businesses. Again, for another capacity, it comes down to relationships, and in hospitality, it's incumbent upon operators to establish those relationships with their guests, because that's how they're going to be successful.
Thank you, Paul. And just due to time constraints, I think we've got time for just one last one, so I'll address that to Chris. Chris, you mentioned the kind of the Rosemary Square, Rosemary and Thyme example a little earlier in the discussion, where projects like Rosemary Square can help folks that are, you know, in a lockdown appreciate living in that mixed use kind of all-in-one neighborhood setting. Why do you think there are not more projects like Rosemary Square in terms of design? And with that, how do you think places and designs like the Rosemary District can become better connected to the downtown to create a more cohesive neighborhood? and a more live, work, play environment?
So to answer the second question first, you know that we've got a plan to reimagine Fruitville Road, which would certainly be probably the strongest thing we can do. The other thing, you know, one of our big connectors between Rosemary and downtown is on Lemon Ave. Lemon Ave, once it gets past First Street and Sur La Table, goes into sort of a dead zone. The bus station is there. And then you sort of got the sides of buildings. It was never treated as a street frontage. So that really needs to be reimagined. We need to have, you know, continue the conversation that's been going on for 20 years about the location of that bus stop. So each one of those connectors has to be thought about, and Lemon is certainly one of the most important. In terms of Rosemary and those kind of spaces, you know, that is somewhat encouraged by the fact that Rosemary has a 5-story height limit generally, as opposed to 10 stories in the core. Both Citrus Square and Rosemary Square actually wouldn't meet present code in downtown for a couple of different reasons. And you know, those things need to be discussed with the planners. They would need a variance today to build them, or an adjustment downtown. So you know, we've got to look at when things are successful. Our planning regulators have to look at why are those things successful, and is there something we ought to be doing that make those things more possible in the future. And you know, really do a deep dive on it. One of the things I keep talking about is, you know, the whole parking or traffic issue that comes up every time you talk about an apartment building. We have so many opportunities now for somebody to go in and study the Sarasota apartment buildings and look at how traffic comes out of those buildings and into those buildings at peak hours. It absolutely does not match what you get from the national statistics on it. So we've got to do a study just to prove to people that all of that traffic you think is going to just be so terrible really doesn't happen. And you can prove it to yourself by just standing outside one of those apartment buildings at peak hours in the morning or afternoon, and you'll see that there isn't just a constant flow of traffic, which again comes back to this idea of we've got to study what's working well here. And every time we're in a public meeting, remind everybody in the room that, hey, here's 5 examples of what works great here locally. It's different from the nation. And we ought to be making it easier to do this kind of thing than more difficult.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And Susan, I'll chair back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I guess the sign of a successful program is when we have questions that remain. So we did not even get to all the questions. I really want to thank every one of our panelists. I think this was an amazing conversation. I hope we have a better sense of where we're going from here. And I think one of the things that was most exciting for me is we're getting back to the same old conversations we were having before the pandemic reared its ugly head. So thank you again. Look forward to next month with Ted Jones. He is an amazing speaker. We have had him for a number of years, and it's always good to be able to compare and contrast and hold him accountable for his previous perspective. So thank you. Have a great new year. We'll all be glad maybe to see 2020 go, and Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and all the best. And congratulations to our new board members. Thank you.
See ya.